Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Welcome back to the Online Great Books podcast. This is your producer, Trent, and today we're going to listen to part 2 of my discussion with Scott about Shakespeare's Hamlet. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go back to last week's episode and give it a listen. This is a pretty deep conversation about a pretty long and involved play. This is Shakespeare's longest play, so it deserved a long conversation too. So we split it up into 2 episodes. In the previous episode, we talked a lot about the legacy of Shakespeare on the English language, on some of the colloquialisms and slang terms that we still use in our language today, as well as his impact on literature and how Shakespeare embodies the characteristics of modern writing. We talked about the evolution of rhetoric and storytelling from ancient literature, some of the works that we've covered before on this podcast, like the Iliad and Prometheus, and how things have evolved over the years into modern tragedies and comedies that we're familiar with in our contemporary media, like television and film. Today, we're going to look a little bit closer at the text. We're going to read through some of Hamlet's soliloquies. We're going to look closer at the structure of the language in Shakespeare's plays and see if that can inform our readings and our understanding of this play and see if it gives us any insight into human nature. All right, let's get to it. This is part 2 of our discussion of Hamlet. Absolutely, and there's definitely these. This play was written with an eye towards, that conversation that we talk about.
And those groundlings, those normal people that came, would have known something of that. Yeah. I think that chunk that the player recites is actually from a Christopher Marlowe play, I think.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So this is like country
Shakespeare's
music. This is like when Waylon sings about Willie or whatever.
Right.
You got Shakespeare talking about Marlowe and
great cross promotion there too.
Right. Yeah. And he's got all these turns of phrase. He calls back to the Aeneid. He calls back to other plays. He's got all these turns of phrase, and he's a studier, a student of rhetoric, and he just uses these devices over and over and over again. Our own Malachi is a big fan of using these rhetorical devices and studying these tropes, these formations of these sentence formations, these certain kinds of syntax that do things to our brain, like the to be or not to be. That is the question, where he puts this verb at the beginning of the sentence, makes us think about the action primarily. Right.
That's right. And yeah, let's explore that, because I think one of the things that I wanted to do is to get into the soliloquies of Hamlet. So there are 7 in total. And I think that the really these are the heart of the play. You could just read the soliloquies and get at most of what this play is about, in my opinion. So let's take a look at that in more detail. So should we read a passage?
Yeah, get it, man.
Okay. So you've heard this all before. I'll do my best Laurence Olivier impression. No, I'm just kidding. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing in them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks the flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come, there's another one, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph, and those horizons be all my sins remembered. So Ophelia, at the end of that soliloquy, walks in the door, and he's turned away. Yeah, I think this is truly the center of the play, and it's interestingly located in the geographic center of the play. This is Act 3, Scene 1. I think it begins at line 64 or thereabouts. And as you noted, Scott, it starts with the question and a very simple verb, right? The first verb of any language, right? To be or not to be.
Yeah, I mean, existence. To exist, to be, is how he starts this. So we know immediately what the subject of this thing is about. He doesn't start off by saying, I'm wondering if I would be better off if I was dead or not. There's nothing to question here in that first sentence about what's getting ready to follow, and it just indexes the mind to the subject at hand, and so everything that is said after that, we know exactly what idea that's in service of, and that maybe it sounds like I'm making a lot of that, but I think I think that we can take it for granted because he did it, right? Like I could have rewritten this in my own words 1,000,000 times, and I would never have put that simple verb at the very beginning of the soliloquy like that.
Right.
And it makes all the difference. Yeah, it just makes all the difference here. And so is this a contemplation of suicide, or is he just trying to weigh out a life ahead of him versus what will come after it?
Yeah, I think that's. I think at the top line, we're meant to think suicide is the first kind of meaning here in the layer cake,
or it could be, would we be better off were we not to be at all had we never been born?
Right. Yeah. Existence. Right. So we have. So if we kind of work down the lines, we have to die, to sleep, no more, and by asleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. I think there's a mortality question here.
When
perhaps,
he himself,
perhaps part of this is, I think, calling back to that idea of philosophy, that undercurrent of philosophy that runs through this play, in that philosophy ultimately, it's the Socratic question, right? It's to know thyself, right, and to awaken oneself to the existence of truth in the world. And I think in some ways, Hamlet, the veil has been pulled, right? He's seen the Wizard of Oz, and now he's questioning if he would have been better off having never done so, having never been awoken to the truths of his life and just living kind of a pleasant lie instead.
For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay? He's got problems with justice right now. The law's delay, the insolence of office, heir apparent, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself, this is the suicide piece, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. So bodkin, we've got, that is like a Middle English suffix that we put on the end there. It's a, what do they call it? A diminutive, the kin part. So that's your small body.
The kin.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting take on it. I think there's a double meaning here, right? Because a bodkin on what was an arrow, right? That was an arrow of war, is a broad-headed arrow that was meant to pierce armor. So it has we have a weapon here, but that's an interesting double meaning there, and I don't think it's a stretch to read it as such, because as we see, right, we've got double meaning all over the place here.
Yeah, like you've got Hansel and Gretel. That's like the German diminutive. That's little Hans and little Greta. And so we would do Bodkin, mannequin. It's a little man,
Yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So little man, perhaps you could read that as the sleeping man versus the awakened man.
And then quietus, like people around here from where I'm from use that word, quietus. I don't know that 12-year-olds would, but the older people that I grew up around when I was a little kid use that word, and I ran into words like that all the time in here that we kind of use in the South that they're still around, and I had watched I watched a YouTube video that the Globe Theater actually produced, and they had hired some linguists to look at some thesauri, some rhymes, contemporary letters, and so on, and try to figure out what was the accent like when these plays were being performed, for the first time. And in the consensus is it probably sounds more like a Southern United States accent than it would a Londoner's accent of today. The thought was that the United States was kind of a time capsule. We didn't have a continental Europe just 90 miles away influencing the language. So there's been less pressure on English here than there has been on English in London. And so I see these words like quietus and tetter and there are others too. And I'm like, oh yeah, my grandmother would say that, and I don't think she ever read Shakespeare.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think too, there's definitely something that is a hallmark of Southern speech, is a certain rhythm in music. That goes hand in hand with the accent, right? Most Southerners have a slow accent, myself notwithstanding, but I have some cousins from Selma, Alabama. Selma, Alabama.
Right.
And it's, you have to really take your time when listening to them, or they force you to take your time. But yeah, that's interesting because you can see it's kind of reflected in the verse, right? So this verse, we haven't mentioned it yet, but one of the hallmarks of Shakespeare's verse is that it's written in Iambic Pentameter. So in short, it's alternating short and long syllables. Da-da, 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 da-da. And it almost has a heartbeat feel to it. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And that's what makes these passages really flow with a sort of poetry.
To die, to sleep, to die, perchance to dream. I admire his ability to do that, but it's lost on me. I've got a 10 ear when it comes to that stuff, and it just seems. I don't know. I've got a 10 ear for it. I have almost no appreciation for it beyond just the sort of intellectual exercise, like how darn hard that would be to do. Like you don't just have to tell a story. You don't have to tell a story well, but you also have to have the accents and the syllables all follow the certain pattern. I mean, that's quite an exercise, but it doesn't make me enjoy it more.
Well, I think this again is where seeing the stage production, right? The actual stage production with actors delivering these lines is where it all comes to fruition, right? These long, dense passages roll off the tongue, right? They're much easier to perform and actually much easier to memorize because there was some music to them, right? We tend to we memorize music and rhythms quite easily. And that was kind of a easy way for actors to imagine playing Hamlet, right? If you were the lead actor in Hamlet, I mean, you've got thousands of lines to learn for this play. And it was an easy way to do that when they're written in verse. But I think it helps create, there's almost a story that's told through the music of the words, separate from the actual content of the words. So it's all just part of the performance. It's when we break it down, it's kind of one of those things where you hear a great piece of music and then you can break it down and look at the melodies and the counter melodies and the harmony and the rhythm, and it's just so incredibly complex. And yet, it only really makes sense when you hear it in full,
right,
in its true form.
Yeah, and the Iambic Pentameter, the 2-syllable, the five pairs of syllables. It's interesting that they settled on that. There's something about language where English tends to settle on that, and then all this Attic Greek, all this ancient Greek stuff is dactylic hexameter.
Hexameter,
yeah, which is like pa pa, like long short short, long short short, in groups of 6. I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost you can really, if you want to take the music analogy even further, I think that the Greek having been in Latin, having been much closer to the Middle Eastern countries, probably had some of there was a lot of influence of Eastern or Middle Eastern rhythms on their music and culture. We can take, for example, I know you like Dave Brubeck.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dave Brubeck was heavily influenced by Turkish musicians, and Blue Rondo a la Turk, the opening track off of the Time Out album, awesome track. Well, it's in, I believe it's 9/8. Let me think if that's, that's right. It's in 9/8, the opening piece of music before it goes into the 4/4 swing rhythm. And it's 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. And he got that rhythm when he visited Turkey and was listening to the local musicians play. And so those Middle Eastern rhythms tended to be interesting groupings of threes, but those blocks of 3, whether they add up to a block of 9 or 6 or just 3, those blocks of 3 could be further subdivided into 2s and 3s, and that's what gives that kind of unique Eastern feel. We see similar things in Indian music, where they pick a certain discrete piece of time and subdivide it on the fly. So the drummers everyone would agree to play for, let's say, whatever the Indian equivalent of 64 bars is, but they would subdivide it improvisationally. It's crazy. Whereas Western music, we think of it kind of more from the ground up, right? We define the beat, and we define how many times we're going to repeat that beat, and we repeat it. And I think that you can kind of see that evolution into what is now kind of commonly understood Western music, right? Where we have most things are in fact, we call common time is 4/4, mm-hmm. 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. And you can swing or subdivide that. And one of the common ways to do that would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And here we can see this iambic pentameter.
Yep.
Da 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 da. It's a uniquely Western thing.
You are a nerd. It's good.
I love this stuff.
Do we want to hit another soliloquy?
Yeah, maybe one other thought here.
Yeah, I wanted to say one more thing about to be or not to be. Go ahead, though.
Okay, yeah. So I think the end of the soliloquy is what's interesting to me. Right, Hamlet is describing all of these things that we suffer through in life, all of these disappointments, the spurns, the injustices, and he says, but why don't we just end it all? What keeps us from that? And he says, well, it's the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. And he says then, thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought. And so this gets back to that argument I was making before, is Hamlet is a quintessentially modern character because he has a crisis of faith. The philosophy that underpins his education and that runs underneath the play is sort of the philosophy is kind of the bedrock upon which we will determine what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. He's saying that in Hamlet's estimation, it's having a conscience at all that makes us cowards. It drives us to indecision. It's hard. We cannot resolve to do something because we think about it. We think about the consequences, and that this is where his sort of adolescent understanding of philosophy rubs up against the real world, where he realizes that if he takes a stand against the injustice of the king, he's going to destroy his mother, right? He ends up inadvertently destroying Ophelia because he kills Polonius, thinking that Polonius is Claudius. And I think that was a touchstone for him in just realizing that his actions have weight and that he cannot just think himself into a solution to this problem. He's going to have to take a stand, but in doing so, he's going to lose his sense of morality and justice.
Yeah, and Ophelia walks in on him as he wrestles with all this, to be or not to be, contemplating the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. And she walks in on that, and then she's the one that ends up killing herself.
Right. Yeah, she drowns herself in a river after witnessing or seeing her father dead.
By the hand of her beloved. Yeah. And she's just like, cognitive dissonance. I'm out.
Yeah, it breaks her.
You know, so she's the one who's maybe the person of action here. Okay, let's get to that. So Hamlet has an opportunity. He has an opportunity he walks up on Claudius in prayer, vulnerable, and Hamlet has a sword at his side. It's mentioned over and over again in the play, and he has an opportunity to run him through, to do it right then. And in the play, halfway through, and doesn't. He's very Catholic. He's concerned that if he kills the man in a moment of prayer, that he will have salvation and will go to heaven, essentially. That's the reason he gives, but I think he just hesitates. I don't think he's a murderer, and I don't think he's a killer, and he doesn't.
Right.
And then later on, in what seems like a whim, he strikes out at the curtain, to find out it's not Claudius behind the curtain, but Polonius, and kills him. So when he has a chance to think about it, he doesn't. And when he has the knee jerk, he does, and he does kill. And then that's when it all starts to come undone even more.
Yeah, I think we can. Another good soliloquy to look at is I don't know what number in the order of soliloquies it is, but it's in Act 4, Scene 4, beginning around line 34. This will differ depending on what version you have, but Hamlet has been banished to England, I believe.
Which is one of the places I laughed out loud in there. They're like, I can't remember exactly where it is, but here's the crux of the thing. Like, why are you going to send him to England? And he's like, I think he's crazy. They're all crazy in England. They'll never notice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's those island people.
Right.
Island people are strange. Yeah. The English are no different. Yeah. So that's, so Hamlet has been banished to England, and on the way he runs across Fortinbras, and Prince Fortinbras is marching on Poland, I believe. And basically we're led to understand that Poland, this land that Fortinbras is taking, it doesn't really have any discernible value other than the fact that it is some lands that, Fortinbras is trying to avenge the name of his father, who was slain by the elder King Hamlet. And we see in this moment, Hamlet is lamenting his own hesitance to act, while admiring Fortinbras's resolution to act, right? So again, this is the concept of a foil character, where Fortinbras is this, maybe to a fault, this warrior-like mentality of moving to act without considering. He does not sit around and think about it. He just goes and does.
Yeah. His dad is dead too. They're
right.
peers. They're about the same age, and they both came to a fork in the road, and they have done two different things. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I'll just read just the beginning of this soliloquy. I'm not going to read the whole thing. How all occasions do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more. Sure, he that made us with such large discourse, looking before and after, gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fusten us unused. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which, quartered, hath but one part wisdom, and ever 3 parts coward, I do not know. Yeah, so again, this is where I see that line of philosophy as being an answer, reason being this answer to the problems that to the problems that Hamlet faces.
He verges on cursing his reason here. Actually, I think he's like, God.
He does, yes, yeah. But without it, what are we? We're just beasts, right?
Yeah, the beasts that feed and sleep.
We just eat and sleep and we die.
Right. We just Netflix and chill.
Right.
That's it. We've all seen people that we thought that don't seem to think about their lives very much. We've all probably know those people, and they delight in some simple things sometimes. And of course, we're not privy to their inner dialogue or monologue, but they seem to not have the troubles that we have. They seem to not wrestle with the things we wrestle with. And I'm probably lacking some empathy. I'm probably not seeing that in those troubles in those people like I experienced them in myself. But I think we've all had that experience. You're like, man, that guy, like, stuff happens to him and he just bounces back and he's just happy-go-lucky, doesn't seem to care. And it's like, there's something about those people that's irrational. Not that they're dumb, right? But they don't rationate. They don't dwell on it. They don't weigh it. They don't.
Right. Revenge is rational.
Yeah. And they just, it's either rational or it's completely not. But, but the person who can be present to their life and do their life is very enviable to me. Whereas, I'm prone to get up in my head about it and overthink things. And the truth of it is we have the thing in front of us to do, which is our life. We have our life in front of us to do right now. Right. We need to make good decisions, but gosh, I think one of the problems with the rationality and the reason that Shakespeare, that Hamlet is running up against here is there isn't a right answer.
That's right. Yeah.
And no amount of cogitating about this is going to get him the answer. He's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. There is no path to happiness here for him.
Right. I think that's ultimately what makes what I said at the very beginning, that this is Shakespeare is a quintessentially modern writer, and this is a modern play, and Hamlet's a modern character, because what we see when we go back to a lot of ancient literature is that there is a I don't want to say it's proselytizing, but there's often there's a clear moral lesson to be learned, or things can be allegorical, or even, myth itself myth serves to describe, is some attempts to describe a divine order upon the world, right? And some roots in a system of right and wrong that predates humans, right? In our own limited faculties of reason and emotion and all that. But what Shakespeare's pointing out here is that, I think you're totally right, that on the one hand, reason and philosophy are cited as tools for outing the truth, right? I'll quote from scene 2, Act 2, scene 2, line 390. God's blood, there is something in this more than natural if philosophy could find it out. Right? That's just one example, right? But and this I can see, again, I can see Hamlet coming from university and being full of ideas and having studied having studied Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and thinking he has this divine, or sorry, this ancient tool set that's been created and tested over the centuries, and now he applies it to life, his own life, real life, and there's only tragedy.
Yeah, this is right.
And so Shakespeare he very clearly avoids trying to moralize. There is no moral here. It simply is. And I think that's a quintessentially modern observation. It's almost nihilistic.
Yeah.
But I think maybe you could say it's existential, perhaps, is a better way to say it.
Yeah, that's interesting. The older plays, the Greek tragedies in particular, the epics, they're really about fate. The heroes, the protagonists in those stories, they don't get to ratiocinate. They don't get to be reasonable. They don't get to think about what's going on. It's fate. Things happen to them, and then they're often undone by their virtues. Achilles is the bravest of the soldiers, and as such, bravest and most athletic of all the soldiers, and as such, he's compelled to do battle, and he's undone by that. He's given a choice at the beginning of the Iliad, or he recounts that he knows he has a choice. He can return and be a humble farmer and live out a quiet, unremarkable life, or he can live out his virtues and go out in glory. And so they're almost always undone by their virtues. Here, it's not clear what Hamlet's virtues are. There's no path forward. I don't know that fate isn't a player in this play. Now, you go forward just a little bit farther, and you're going to be neck deep in the Enlightenment, and I don't know that playwrights of England and deep in the Enlightenment are going to write a play like this.
Right. Yeah, with an appeal. Yeah, there's the if we look at the gravedigger scene in Act 5, it's essentially a rumination on the death of Ophelia, right? Did she, because Ophelia goes mad before she commits suicide, right, and jumps in the river and drowns. And so the question was, did madness drive her to jump in the river, or did she choose to? Mm-hmm. And that's a very important question, because in Catholic England, there are grave implications for your soul,
right?
Depending on
and by the way,
how exactly the thing went down.
This ain't Catholic England at this time, and I'm not saying this to contradict you. I think this was very interesting. This is actually.
Oh yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah, not Catholic England.
Yeah, but they still Shakespeare is still espousing these very, very Catholic ideas at that point. So even though
we could say just highly Christian ideas.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting to me. Hamlet's stuck here. There's no path forward. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. Who knows what he's going to do? And then while you were talking about that, and I was thinking about this sort of pre-enlightenment, enlightenment, post-enlightenment thing. Like this is the opposite of a Arthur Conan Doyle story. This is the opposite of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock always knows what the right thing to do. If they can just smoke up enough pipes and think about it long enough, there's always an answer. Everything's discernible. It just takes enough insight and enough intellect, and you can find a path forward, and justice will be done. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I mean, and our mindset is almost like that now. like if we could just apply enough resources and enough technology, we're going to solve all the ethical concerns of humanity. We're going to have a just and equitable society, whatever that is. And, that ain't Hamlet's world. And I think that our world is the same world as Hamlet's world. I think that we are born to suffer, and it's our job to do our lives as best we can. And that's where he's stuck. Yeah. The bad thing in this, I mean, there are lots of bad things, but the thing that was most gut-wrenching for me about the whole thing is watching it happen to a young man on the threshold of adulthood.
Right.
He had his wings cut just when he needed them. And he's probably lucky he died at the end.
Right.
Yep. How about that for Dark?
Yeah, it's interesting that Horatio is really the only one that makes that out of this okay, and he's just kind of standing there at the end, like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah,
he's kind of a stand-in for us, the audience, right? There's no clear takeaway. I was reflecting on this because at the end of this soliloquy, Hamlet goes on to say, "How stand I then that have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, let all sleep, while to my shame I see the imminent death of 20,000 men that for a fantasy and a trick of fame go to their graves like beds." He's referring to the men under Fortinbras marching on Poland. "They fight for a plot whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb enough and continent to hide the slain." So they're saying, these men are marching to die over here for a land that's not even big enough to hold them.
Yeah.
For the lives they're going to spend doing that. "Oh, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth." So he does resolve to act. And I think this is very interesting. Hamlet resolves to act. He will catch, he will devise a plan to kill Claudius. At the same time, Fortinbras also acts. Fortinbras gets what he wants. He gets Denmark back.
Mm-hmm.
He avenges the death. He avenges his father. And Hamlet doesn't get what he wants. He dies, right? Laertes dies. They die in a duel. Claudius does die. Hamlet does eventually kill Claudius. But in Claudius trying to kill Hamlet, Gertrude dies. So again, we might be tempted to believe that Shakespeare is trying to tell us that action is important, right? That whatever situation you're faced with, that action is the important thing, to actually do something about it. But clearly we're undercut immediately by what happens to Hamlet.
Yeah, when he kills Claudius, it reads to me like it was for the treachery in the duel. Right? He finds out that the sword is poisoned, and he's like, "What?" And he runs him through at that point. It wasn't like, "Hey, this is for Dad."
Right.
And of course, if you're the director or the actor, playing these parts, I could see that you could take that either way, and they're both perfectly good readings and performances of what was written there. More about the graveside thing. That's where the "Alas, poor Yorick," the soliloquy with the skull is.
Right.
That's been quoted in Bugs Bunny cartoons, like maybe SpongeBob. Like it's everywhere. So he says, "Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rims at it. Here hung those lips that I've kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar? Not one now to mock your own grinning." So this guy was a joke. He was a jester. He was the clown. He was about fun. He was about merriment. And so now he's dead. So, Hamlet can't have any of that in his life. There ain't nothing about Hamlet's life that's fun, and they're both going to be they're going to throw dirt on both of them eventually. Just terrible. This is a bummer. How dare you make me read this?
Yeah. We'll have to read like Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah, let's get some Falstaff in.
King Henry IV.
Yeah.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, I think this arguably is I think Shakespeare's masterpiece. He's written so many masterful plays, but I think that it's all here in terms of the rhetoric, the language, the characters, the depth of the characters. They're so slippery. They defy any sort of unified theory about them, right? Which is the way we are as people, right? And I think that's ultimately what makes this play compelling, is that we all know people like this, right? We see in these characters flaws and faults that we see in ourselves too. And the other thing we see is that our lives, we're not all dealt the same hand in life. And some of us are dealt pretty rotten hands, in fact. And I think that's what makes this play compelling, is that it's an exploration of the dark side of life.
Back to my mention of divorce. This young man has no mentor here. His father's gone. Polonius is shown at the beginning like maybe he could be, like, his speech to Laertes. He come to find out he's not. He's kind of a treacherous, weaselly kind of a character. His mother can't shepherd him into manhood. Our mothers can't, unfortunately. And his friends are important here. And like you said, we're not all dealt the same hand. But maybe the lesson here is, though, that it is your hand. Those are your cards, and you must play.
Right.
You must play. And it doesn't always turn out the way we want it to. In fact, it never does. It never does. If there was a sequel, we would probably find out that Fortinbras doesn't have a joyous life either. He got all the things he wanted, and now he has to have a food taster, and he has to find some way to govern the Danes, who are Viking stock and probably not really excited about having him as a king.
They're ill-tempered.
Yeah, things aren't going to go well for him either.
I think that's I like the way you said that. It's everyone has a hand. Sometimes the optimal hand is to fold, or the optimal play
to be or not to be.
Right. But either way, you must play. You're not living if you don't play.
Yeah. And you can't amend your hand. There's in wider society, there are a lot of concerns about equity, and you've got your cards and you must play. That's all there is to it. And some hands are losing hands, but what are you going to do?
That's right.
What are you going to do? Nothing is good nor bad, except thinking make it so.
Yeah.
That's an hour and a half on this. We could talk about it for 3 weeks. I do want to say, as somebody that's going to probably end up lead some discussions about this, I was trying to take our sort of Adler approach to reading this and trying to figure out what the big questions might be that we would use to kick off a discussion. So I don't know, man. I have failed so far.
Well,
one, what is this about? I don't know. That might be a good question.
Well, I think it's a play of the mind. I think you could make a pretty strong argument that this is a play of internal plot rather than external plot.
But is that what it's about? Maybe. What's Shakespeare trying to say? What is he trying to tell us here? He's got 4 hours of dialogue. What's he trying to say? Is there a hero in this story? So I was just trying to come up with these bigger overarching questions that we could that we could use to kick off important discussions about this. And this one's a tough one. This one is not my forte.
Right.
Not my forte. You got a big question about this one that we could add to the list that we might ask if we were leading a group?
Yeah, I think this play is an early form of existentialism, right? Because there's really not, and I think we often see Hamlet reaching for meaning, but
in a very secular way, by the way. At this time, there would have been these morality plays going on that were really cut and dried, that have a moral at the end of the story, and maybe would have been created to, highlight the role of the church in your life, etc. And in here, this is almost entirely secular, other than worrying about Ophelia's last sacraments. He's not turning to prayer. He's not turning to. It's secular. He's looking between his ears to figure out what he should do and what his life's going to be like. There's probably some good questions that could be formed around that. We're gonna have to cut this off because I could just talk about it for 10 hours.
Absolutely. Well, if you stuck around with us this far, I have to say again, if you're encountering Shakespeare for the first time, or just a new play by Shakespeare for the first time, I really recommend watching a production. You want to see something better than your Shakespeare at the Park. Not that those are bad necessarily, but it's kind of, if you haven't seen these plays acted by some top-notch actors, then you're really missing out. So if you don't have access to a local theater where you can see some very high-quality acting, then I recommend for Hamlet, Kenneth Branagh's film adaptation.
What did you think of that Mel Gibson, 1991?
I don't know. I have not seen that. I have not seen that one. I have seen the old Laurence Olivier version.
Yeah.
But see, I believe both of those are abridged versions. So if you want to see the real thing, 100% accurate to the text, then you want to see Branagh's version. But, it's stacked. We've got the first scene, we've got Jack Lemmon, we've got a lot of very famous Shakespearean actors, even though they're not famous film actors. We've also got Kate Winslet. Yeah, it's just on and on and on. Well, Richard Attenborough shows up at the end for no particular reason.
Just because they could get him.
Because James Judi Dench is in there.
Right.
So, but anyway, I think that's important, is to fully appreciate these plays. I think you have to see that. For other Shakespeare plays, Scott, I'd recommend the BBC has, back in the 70s and 80s, filmed. They staged productions and then filmed those productions of all of Shakespeare's plays, every single one of them. So many of these have not been adapted into a big budget film, but they do have some pretty good productions that are good resources too.
Have you seen? There's a series on YouTube. Let me see if I can find the name of it. It's a Star Trek revival where these people just crowdfunded to just take the first series and just continue doing stories. They rebuilt the sets and all this stuff, and they do these really great. I can't remember the name of it. They do these really great productions of what looks and feels and reads and like the first Star Trek series, and they spend money on it. They do crowdsourcing and whatever. Somebody needs to take these plays that haven't been produced and use that model. Do a short, do a 2, 3, 4 minute, do one of these soliloquies, do it upright, put it on YouTube, do a crowdfunding thing, raise the money, and shoot them act by act if you have to start getting all of these things produced in a high quality production.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody needs to do that. Well, there's another one of those. It just took us a year and a half or so to get to something written in the quasi-modern era. But thanks for suggesting that one. What are we going to do next, Trent? You and I.
Gosh, well, I think we got to go back and, in light of what we talked about, the player's speech, we need to read the Aeneid,
Aeneid.
Virgil's Aeneid.
Okay.
We haven't covered that yet. But I think we ought to do a comedy of Shakespeare's as well. I think it's worth examining one of the the lighter-hearted comedies.
Yeah, you pick those out. We'll get the Aeneid in here, and we'll put out another one of these. Hopefully, this will go out in a couple of parts. And if you are interested in doing this, you should go to onlinegreatbooks.com and join our VIP waiting list. And if nothing else, you get a bunch of stuff from us that could help you start your own group. So don't be afraid to join the waiting list if you just want those resources. And then once you're on there, we'll notify you when we open enrollment next time. And then you can join us in discussing these books. It takes us a little while to get to Shakespeare, but the wheel grinds slow and fine, and we get there anyway. Tell a friend about us, please. Tell a friend about our show and pass it on. That'd be a great big help to us. And go to iTunes and give us a good review, because that helps other people in iTunes find us. So those 5-star reviews help drive us to the top of the iTunes heap. Our little show is picking up some speed slowly. It's in a weird little niche, but we're picking up some speed, and we're probably already in the top 10% of podcasts. And we'd like to keep on climbing and have more people reading and thinking about these things that formed us. Because when you read Shakespeare, you realize he did. You know, I was reading this stuff, Trent, and I was like, my grandparents used phrases from Shakespeare, and I don't think they knew. But this guy it just formed us, man. It's
yeah. I remember something that's always stuck with me. There's a food documentary called Hero Dreams of Sushi about a Japanese man who is obsessed with making some of the best sushi in the world. He runs one of the top sushi restaurants in Tokyo, and I don't know if he's still alive. He's pretty old when the documentary is filmed. But one thing he did very specifically with his crew, with in the kitchen, is he made them dinner every single day, made them lunch. And the reason he said he did it personally, and the reason he said he did that is that if you want to become a great chef, you must eat excellent food. You can't eat good food. You have to eat excellent food. And he's like, I make the best food here. You're going to have the best, because if you don't know what it is, how are you ever going to be expected to make it? And I think that's one of the things, that's one of the other things that, we can read Harry Potter.
How dare you?
It's great. It's wonderful. I love Harry Potter. It's great literature. But if you've never read the best, then you have no idea where this stuff comes from.
Yeah.
And it's always, I think it's part of the reason why we read Shakespeare is if you feed your mind the best of the best, then I think you internalize good things.
That Harry Potter stuff, I think seeks to caveat. I haven't read it, not going to, don't even care. But I think it seeks to replicate a lot of the aesthetic that an aesthetic that it is aggregated from Shakespeare, Tolkien, some Greek and Roman stuff. It's like a quasi-classicist kind of an aesthetic that she's created there, and it's very attractive to people. Well, just put that thing down and go read one of these. Yeah, well, there's enough of that. Please, again, subscribe, give us 5-star reviews on iTunes, and send this to your friends, and we will do another show for you next week. Thank you.